It's the 2022 World Cup. It's Portugal's players. Hello and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccerphiles Canada. I'm Kevin, and today we'll be looking at Portugal's squad for the 2022 World Cup. This preamble is going to be the same for every mediacast we do for the Players Series, so those familiar with it can jump ahead to around 3.5 or 4 minutes to when we begin talking about the team. The times for each section are at the top of the show notes, and for YouTube watchers there's a handy dandy little bar on the bottom of the screen that can take you to different points in the podcast, and you can also click on the numbers in the timestamp and go directly to that point. For those looking for a quick version of this, you can skip to near the end of the mediacast, the last 10 minutes or so, where we summarize the likely starters. And just prior to that, with about 25 or 30 minutes remaining, we'll have some discussion on the squad. That's the main issues with the squad, their club affiliation, some statistics, and an overview of new, injured, and outgoing players. We'll also be editing this mediacast into a shorter version for those who are just looking for an overview. For those looking for a deeper dive, you've come to the right place. We go through the players and how likely they are to make it to the final squad, and we explain why we think so and give information on each player's history and standing with the squad. And the way we do this is by first organizing the players into their designated position. We do realize that these are a bit artificial since players don't always play in their coded position, but we nevertheless find it a good way to organize the discussion. And then we go through the players and share some of the data we've collected in our soccer files. And we use that data to try to predict how likely the player is to make the team, based mostly on their recent participation, but a couple of other factors as well. We categorize them into definite, likely, possible but unlikely, and seems to be off the squad. We also mention big players who have recently retired and make note of any that we know to be currently injured. And we finish with a quick run through of the squad again and try to determine which of the players will be the starters. Right, and for those following on YouTube, we run a very simple graphic where we list the names, and you can actually see the players' names in print, as it were. And this is the same broadcast for the audio podcast, so we're going to try to repeat the names a few times to help listeners familiarize themselves with the players' names, so that when they step onto the field, you have a sense of who they are. And perhaps you can impress your friends by telling them a couple of details that you learned here. And that's as much as we can do to this point, but as the rosters are being published, we'll do an update podcast on teams and players. For the players, that will essentially be going over the predictions that we make here, updating them based on the games played to that point and any new information that we learn, and revealing which players were selected for the preliminary and final rosters. So keep your eye out for those, probably in early to mid-November. All right, the preamble is done, so let's move on to talking about the team. And we've done a few podcasts on Portugal. We did one first for the Euro Cup, and in 2021, Euro 2020 it was called. And we also have done the group podcast for this World Cup. So Portugal in Group H, and a short version of that as well. And here are some of the things that came out of that. So I'm going to call the first one the what and the how. So the what refers to the final results that Portugal has achieved, and those have been quite good. Recently, they won the 2016 Euro Cup, and they've been very consistent in reaching cups and mostly passing the group stages. But how they have done it is a bit less convincing, often finishing second in their qualifying group and requiring a playoff to reach the tournaments, and actually never in recent times finishing first in their group stage, in the group stage of a tournament. So 2016 is actually the most illustrative example of both, where they finished third in their group stage behind Hungary and Iceland, and then went on to win the tournament. So overall, we'd say they were a little less convincing on deeper analysis than they seem to be on a superficial overview of their results. Next, well, we're going to do the lineups soon, and you'll see that there are a couple of friendlies in there. So I'll just talk about these to tell you how we're going to handle them in this podcast. So they played 2 friendlies with Qatar early on in World Cup qualifying, so not long after the Euro Cup. And that was after their first qualifying game following the Euro Cup, and then after the second game. As well. And rather than including these in each summary of the positions below as we go through the players, we'll just say that generally they used the non-starters in those games. But we're going to see that they later became starters as part of a rotation system. So fairly experimental lineups, but in a sense kind of important in that it led to a move to a rotation system. So we're going to save this until the end because it'll be a bit easier to understand once we've gone through the players. But just generally speaking, Portugal have moved from a starter and a substitute for each position to basically 2 starters rotating the position. And we'll see that in concrete form as we go through the player by player. Finally, one of the questions that came up was end of a generation. Are Portugal's players aging? And these are kind of more player issues than team issues. So I'm kind of expanding on the team issues here and just introducing the player issues and leaving you to think about them until the end. So you can think about that rotation system and the end of a generation. Is it the end of a generation for them? Aging players, Ronaldo probably the key example there. And what does Portugal have to look forward to after the Cup? So we'll detail those a bit more at the end, but for now we're going to move on to the formations that they've been using. So in the Euro Cup, they played 4 games, and it was a variety of formations, really. A 4-2-3-1 in their opening game, and then a 4-1-4-1 for the next 2 games. That opening game was against Hungary, and the 4-1-4-1 was against Germany and then France. And finally, in the 4th game, so that would be the round of 16 game, they played Belgium with a 4-3-3 formation, and that ends up being the formation, what I call their preferred formation, the formation they go with most often. So we can see that in their World Cup qualifying games. And we see that they use that 4-3-3 formation in 5 of the 7 games, and otherwise used a 4-2-3-1 in their second game. That was against Azerbaijan, and a 4-1-3-2 in their home game with Turkey. That was the second last game. Otherwise, it was 4-3-3 all the way. And those 2 friendlies that I talked about with Qatar were actually near the beginning of World Cup qualifying. It was a 4-3-3 formation in both of those, but we won't pay too much attention to that because even though it doesn't seem like they experimented with formation there, they did experiment with players, putting in, as I said, many non-starter players. However, the Nations League was the last set of games they played in June, and that was a 4-3-3 formation 3 times and a 4-1-4-1 formation once. So in terms of the overall pattern, we see that Portugal is always using 4 at the back, and then the forward line can range anywhere from 1 player to 3 players, 3 players being the most preferred formation. So this comes into play when we look at the summaries of each position. That means in the 4-3-3 formation, for example, a central attacking midfielder is not really used, and wingers are not really used. But we do have kind of right and left midfielders and right and left forwards. So maybe that's the one to keep in mind, since it's the one they use the most. All right, let's move on to talking about the squad then. And hey, wait a minute, I've got the wrong graphic here. Now I've got the right graphic for the YouTube watchers. We'll begin, of course, with the manager. So the manager is Fernando Santos, and he has been manager of Portugal for since the 2016 Euro Cup. So, of course, got great credit for winning that tournament, and the 2018 World Cup, but actually in between the 2017 Confederations Cup and the 2020 Euro Cup. So he's been with them for 4 tournaments. In 2012, he was the manager of Greece in the Euro Cup, and so those are the 2 national teams that he's managed, kind of back to back. He moved directly from Greece to Portugal in 2014, and prior to that was a manager, club manager in both of those countries, managing PAOK Thessalonia and AEK Athens in Greece. AEK Athens twice, actually, and then clubs in Portugal as well, including Porto in Portugal from 1998 to 2001, and Sporting Lisbon in Portugal, and Benfica as well. But Benfica was 2006, and Sporting Lisbon was 2003 and 4. Okay, so an experienced manager in Fernando Santos, and he has done well guiding Portugal through the last few tournaments. So he will definitely be there for this tournament. All right, now the way we usually do this is we introduce the player names first, and then we go through and do a kind of biographical information on the players one by one, and we finish with a summary of the position. So we're going to start with goalkeepers, and as a definite candidate, we have Rui Patricio, and we also have a definite candidate with Diogo Costa. No likely candidates, but we have a possible candidate in Jose Sa and Rui Silva, 2 possible candidates there. And finally, Anthony Lopez, who seems to be off the squad. So let's go back and take a closer look at Rui Patricio. We have him as a definite candidate. He started 7 of their 13 games since the Euro 2021. And was on the bench for the 6 others, so always selected. He has 104 caps since his first one in 2006, and he is 34 years old. 34 years old. He plays for Roma in Italy. That was a move in 2021 from Wolverhampton in England. We're going to see that many of Portugal's players play with Wolverhampton or have played with them. He was with them from 2018 to 21, and with Sporting Lisbon for 12 yeires before that, from 2006 to 18. So that was his last youth club as well. Rui Patricio had his first tournament in the 2008 Euro Cup. He was a substitute there, playing behind goalkeeper Ricardo, on the bench, and didn't see any action. For the 2010 World Cup, he didn't make the final cut there, and so was not part of that tournament. But following that, in Euro 2012, he was the starting keeper, and he has been for every tournament since. So 2014 and 2018 World Cups, and 2016 and 2020 Euro Cups, as well as that 2017 Confederation Cup. So Rui Patricio, a definite candidate for this tournament too. Next, we have Diogo Costa. He got his first appearance on the bench in September 2021, so shortly after the Euro Cup there, and he started 5 of their remaining games, and was on the bench for the 8 others. So he was also always called up. He's a lot younger, 23 years old, and he's been with Portugal since 2021, so a relative newcomer, and those 5 caps. 5 caps are his only 5 caps. He plays with Porto in Portugal since 2019 and was with the Porto Youth Club too. Next, we have Jose Sá as a possible candidate. Jose Sá returned after an 8-month absence in November 2021, and he didn't start any of their remaining 8 games and was on the bench for 4 of them, but then he was injured for the last 4 matches. Now, he is back in action with his club as of August 2022, so injury is not a concern, but he hasn't been selected since before that injury, so bit of a question mark as to his status with the club right now. Jose Sá actually has no caps for Portugal, despite being with them since 2017. He's 28 years old, and I'll get to that soon. He plays for Wolverhampton in England, so kind of replaced Rui Patricio as the goalkeeper. He's been with them since 2021, and prior to that was with Olympiacos in Greece and Porto in Portugal. His first tournament, he has had tournaments despite having no caps. He was on the bench for the 2017 Confederations Cup. He didn't see any action there. But after that, he hasn't been selected, so was not part of the 2018 World Cup or the 2020 Euro Cup. So kind of started to come back into the picture in November 2021, but that injury seems like it damages his chances, but we'll see if he returns for their September games. Rui Silva earned his first cap with a start in June 2021. So that was just before the Cup. But after, he didn't start any of their 13 games since the Euro Cup and was on the bench. He wasn't selected actually for the 9 matches after the Euro Cup, but then came in for the last 4 matches. So replacing the injured Jose Sá as the 3rd string keeper, it seems. So Rui Silva has been with the team since 2021 and just has that 1 cap before Euro 2021 and is 28 years old. And he plays for Real Betis in Spain since 2021 and was with Granada in Spain and Nacional in Portugal before that. He was selected for the Euro 2020. He was on the bench but didn't see any action. So he was the 3rd string keeper there. We saw he kind of lost that spot but then regained it in June. But that was due to an injury to Jose Sá. So again, interesting to see which one they'll go with in the September games. Finally, we have Anthony Lopez, and he just started one of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup. He was on the bench for 4 games, but then not selected for the last 8 matches, so seems to have drifted off the team. Anthony Lopez was born in France, but has played with Portugal since 2015, and he has 14 caps and is 32 years old. He's been with Lyon in France since 2012, and has always been with Lyon in his career. It was his youth club for 8 years also. So Anthony Lopez was a backup keeper in the 2016 Euro Cup. He didn't participate in the 2017 Confederation Cup, but he was also on the roster for the 2018 World Cup and 2022 Euro Cup. I didn't see any action in those games, but seems to have been the 3rd, perhaps even 2nd string keeper there. But as we've seen, he was not selected for the last 8 games and seems to be off the squad now. So that's the candidates for goalkeepers. And let us look at a summary of the position. We have Rui Patricio playing all the games in the Cup and all the games in World Cup qualifying until the last 2 games of the 7. where Diogo Costa took over. And then in the Nations League games in June, they started shared the games, each of them playing 2 of the 4 games. So we're going to see that pattern throughout the Cup, but it's a good example. Rui Patricio being the starting keeper and Diogo Costa as the backup, and that relationship changing to an alternating position between the two. And we'll see that in several positions. All right, let's move on to defenders, and we'll begin with central defenders. And the candidates here are Pepe as a definite candidate, despite being 39 years old. And we also have Danilo Pereira, and I'll just say here, he's a definite candidate. He's actually coded as a defensive midfielder and has played mostly in that position in the past for Portugal. But in this period, from after the Euro Cup until now, he has played more as a central defender. I think he did play 1 or 2 games as a defensive midfielder, but he seems to have become the partnering central defender alongside Pepe. We'll get into that later. That would be at the expense of our third candidate here, Ruben Diaz at the likely level. And then we have Domingos Duarte as a possible candidate. And we have 4 of them actually. Jose Fonte, Thiago Giallo, and David Carmo, all 4 of those possible candidates. And finally, Goncalo Inacio as a possible but unlikely candidate. So let's go back to the top to Pepe. And Pepe is a real veteran with the squad. He started 9 of their 13 games since 2021 and was on the bench for the other 2. He was out with coronavirus for 1 and not selected for 1. So always selected or almost always selected when available. Pepe has been with Portugal since 2007, and he has 128 caps and 7 goals. And as I mentioned, he's 39 years old. So he's been around for a long time. Currently, he's with Porto in Portugal. That's his second stint with them. He was with Besiktas in Turkey before that, and Real Madrid for 10 years, from 2007 to 17, and was with Porto for his first stint before that. Actually, he's native Brazilian, and he became Portuguese in 2007. And he was there for the Euro 2008. So every tournament since the Euro 2008, we won't go through them one by one, but he's been a starter in every tournament since the 2008 Euro Cup. So many tournaments there. In 2020 Euro Cup, again, he was a starter despite his advanced age as a soccer player by then. And he kind of gets in trouble sometime for his complaining or his antics, and is sometimes gets cards, yellow and red cards, and is a thorn in the side of his opponents and sometimes of the fans. So Pepe has been part of the central defense for almost 15 years now, and he looks like he will be in this one too. Okay, Danilo Pereira, or often known just as Danilo, is a defensive midfielder, as mentioned, playing as a central defender, and in one position or the other started 10 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup and was on the bench for 3 others. So always called up by the manager. Danilo has been with Portugal since 2015 and has 63 caps and 2 goals. He's 31 years old, and Danilo Pereira plays for Paris Saint-Germain in France since 2021 and was with Porto in Portugal prior to that. He also played in Italy and was on loan to teams in Netherlands and Greece, so has been around. He was actually born in Guinea-Bissau, but plays for Portugal, of course. His first tournament was in 2016 in the Euro Cup, and there he started 2 games, started game 1, lost his starting position, but was a sub in a few games, and then returned to start game 6. In the 2017 Confederations Cup, he was a substitute, and he didn't make the 2018 World Cup, but that was due to an injury. So Danilo came back for the 2020 Euro Cup, and he started games 1 and 2 and 3, but then he was subbed out of game 3 at halftime and lost his starting position, coming in just as a substitute in game 4 there. He actually, went up for a header against a goalkeeper in game 3 against France there and was knocked out cold. So perhaps it was cautionary that he wasn't started for game 4. Okay, anyway, it looks like he will be a definite candidate. And again, as I said, looks like he's the partner in the central defense at the expense of Ruben Diaz, who's our next candidate. Ruben Diaz started 4 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, and he was subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 2. And he was injured for 2 and not selected for the last 4 matches. So Ruben Diaz has been with Portugal since 2018 and has 39 caps and 2 goals, and he is 25 years old. He plays for Manchester City in England. So what does it tell you about Portugal's quality that they can afford to leave a Manchester City player on the bench, basically, or not even call up such a player? Speaks to the riches of Portugal's talent. Manchester City then in England since 2020, and with Benfica before that, and Benfica was his final youth club as well. So Ruben Diaz was selected for the 2018 World Cup, but he didn't see any action in that cup. But he was a starter in the Euro 2020. He started and finished all games there, scored an own goal in that cup, and was warned by the referee about roughness in the game against Hungary. So not immune to some roughness on the field. Next, we have possible candidate Domingos Duarte. So he started 1 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup. I believe that was one of the friendlies. And he was on the bench for 4 and not selected for 8 others. So Domingos Duarte has been with Portugal just since 2020. He has 3 caps, but he's not a youngster. He's 27 years old, so a bit of a late starter with the national team. And he plays for Getafe in Spain since 2022 and Granada in Spain before that, after leaving Sporting Lisbon in 2019 to play in Spain. Jose Fonte is our next candidate. Jose Fonte started 3 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup. He was subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 2, and not selected for 7 games, including the last 4 matches, so maybe drifting off the team. He's quite elderly too as a soccer player. He is 39 years old, just like Pepe there. And he has been with Portugal just since 2014, though, with 50 caps and 1 goal. So that would mean he joined Portugal when he was 31 years old. 50 caps and 1 goal. He plays for Lille in France since 2018 and was with in China and in England before that. 3 clubs in England, actually. West Ham, Southampton and Crystal Palace. That was from 2008 to 18, all told, and was with Benfica in Portugal prior to that. And Sporting Lisbon was actually his youth club. So Jose Fonte was part of the 2016 Euro Cup squad, where he started on the bench, but for game 4, he earned a starting position and finished all of the games. He only allowed Only one of their 5 goals was actually scored under his watch there. And in the 2017 Federation Cup, it was the inverse, where he started and finished game 1 but lost his starting position there. However, he was a starter in the World Cup, where he started and finished all games in 2018. But in 2020 in the Euro Cup, he was on the roster but saw no action in that tournament. So kind of on and off as a starter at least, and now maybe off even being selected for the squad. Next, we have Thiago Diallo. He got his first appearance on the bench in March 2022 and didn't start any of the remaining 6 games, but he was on the bench for 1 and with the under-21 team for 4. So maybe this tournament comes a bit too early for him. He has no caps and is 22 years old and plays for Lille in France. And the same may be said of David Carmo, our last possible candidate. He got his first appearance on the bench in June 2022, so didn't start any of their 4 games in June, but was on the bench for 3 of them. So he's 23 years old and plays for Porto in Portugal. That's a recent move, actually, from Braga in 2022. And finally, we have Goncalo Inacio. And I have conflicting reports on him, actually. One of my sources says he was on the roster for a game in March 22, but another source says he wasn't. So anyway, an outside chance to be sure. But he is just 21 years old and playing for Sporting Lisbon in Portugal since 2020. So a possibility that we'll see him down the road for Portugal, but not likely for this cup. All right, let's go and summarize the position of central defender. So it was Pepe and Ruben Diaz in the cup and in the first part of World Cup qualifying. And then we saw a defensive midfielder, Danilo Pereira, as well as Jose Fonte coming in for the second half of World Cup qualifying. And those two, Danilo and Jose Fonte, even played the 6th game, 6 of 7 games, as a pairing themselves. But otherwise, either Pepe or Danilo was on the field. And it was Pepe and Danilo in all 4 of the Nations League games. So that seems like a fairly firm pairing. And to me, a bit surprising that Danilo, the defensive midfielder, is being selected ahead of Ruben Diaz. And I wonder if that will continue into the Cup. Okay, let's move on to the left back position. And here we have 2 candidates, Nuno Mendes as a definite candidate and Rafael Guerreiro as a likely candidate. So let's talk about Nuno Mendes. He started 7 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, and additionally was subbed in for 3 and on the bench for 2. So just 1 match that he wasn't called up for. And he's quite young, 20 years old, but he's been with Portugal since 2021 and has amassed 16 caps for them. He plays for Paris Saint-Germain, so a big move in France. So seems to be a very promising young player. That move was in 2022, and he was with Sporting Lisbon before that, and actually loaned to Paris Saint-Germain from 2021. And Sporting Lisbon youth club as well. Not his first youth club, but the last one he was with. And next we have Rafael Guerreiro, a likely candidate because he started 5 of their 13 games since the Euro Cup, was subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 2, but he was also injured for 2 and not selected for a couple of games also. So Rafael Guerreiro, has been with Portugal since 2014, and he has 56 caps and 3 goals and is 29 years old. Playing for Borussia Dortmund in Germany since 2016. and Lorient in France and Caen in France before that. So actually played for youth clubs in France because he was born there, and threw his lot in with the Portuguese team here. So he wasn't involved in the 2014 World Cup, Rafael Guerrero, but he did start in the 2016 2016 Euro Cup, and was injured a bit during that tournament, but that was kind of in the middle and managed to play the last two games there. Kind of like Jose Fonte, only one of their 5 goals against was scored when he was on the field. So that made him look good. He was a starter in the 2017 Confederation Cups. Started games 1 and 2, but again, injury played a role. And that actually put him out of that tournament after game 2. However, he came back in the 2018 World Cup as a starter and started and finished all the games there and in the Euro 2020, where he, like Pepe, before scored an own goal in the tournament. I think Pepe's was in 2016 actually, but suffered the ignominy of an own goal. Poor old Rafael Guerrero, but doing well with the squad and a likely candidate to make the cup. So those are the 2 candidates we have at left back. So let's summarize the position. In the Euro Cup, it was Rafael Guerrero starting all 4 games and also the first 2 games of World Cup qualifying. He came back for game 6 of those 7 World Cup qualifying games, but in the middle, Nuno Mendes played 3 of the games and Diogo Dalot played 1 of the games. Diogo Dalot will meet as a right back. So we'll meet him in the next section. Nuno Mendes also had played both of those friendlies against Qatar too. And then Rafael Guerrero and Nuno Mendes each played 2 of the 4 Nations League games. So once again, we kind of see a starter and backup relationship changing into an alternating or rotating relationship. So that happening with the goalkeeper and the left back position so far. Let's look at right backs then. And for candidates, we have João Cancelo as a definite, and Diogo Dalot, who we just mentioned, as a likely candidate, and Nelson Semedo as a possible candidate there. And we have Cedric Soares as possible but unlikely. So we'll go back to the top and talk about João Cancelo. And he started 9 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, and he was on the bench for 3, so just 1 match that he wasn't selected for, and has been with Portugal since 2016 with 37 caps and 7 goals. He is 28 years old. So he also, like Ruben Diaz, plays for Manchester City in England and has done so since 2019. Prior to that, he was with Juventus in Italy and Valencia in Spain, also loaned to Inter Milan, so kind of taking a tour of the top teams in Europe. And as far as Portugal goes, he was with Benfica in Portugal from 2014 to 15, which was also his last youth club. So he actually, despite being a defender, scored in each of his first 3 caps, although that was against fairly weak teams, but a cool little detail nevertheless. But maybe more interesting, he's never actually participated in a tournament. So he has been on the team since 2016, doesn't seem to have been a consideration for the Euro Cup that year, but wasn't selected for the 2017 Confederations Cup or the 2018 World Cup. He was selected for the 35-man preliminary squad there, but didn't make the final cut. He would have been selected for Euro 2020, and in fact, he was selected for that tournament, but he tested positive for COVID before the tournament and was replaced by Diogo Dalot, who will meet right away here. So João Cancelo, a definite candidate, though, to make his first tournament with Portugal here. Diogo Dalot started 3 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, and he was on the bench for 6 of those and not selected for 4 others. So Diogo Dalot is new to Portugal. He has been with them since 2021, and in that time has earned 6 caps and 2 goals. So very young, 23 years old, Diogo Dalot, and playing for Manchester United in England since 2018. 2018, actually, that's earlier than I thought, but he was loaned out to AC Milan in 2020-21. His Portuguese team was Porto, and he spent his first senior year with them and his entire youth club with them from 2008, so from 9 years old. And if you think that's a surprising age to get started, it's actually relatively old for the top soccer players. Many of them start years before 9. Diogo Dalot, then, his first tournament was the 2000 Euro 2020, where, as we saw, he was called in to replace João Cancelo, and he was just a sub in that tournament, subbing into game 3. Actually, he did start and finish game 4 as well. So Diogo Dalot, a likely candidate here, and Nelson Semedo seems to be kind of the exiting candidate here, and he started 2 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, and he was subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 4, and he was injured for the last 4 matches, so maybe I was premature in saying he was on his way out there. 2 matches that he wasn't selected for. He was actually injured for the June matches, the Nations League games, but he was back in action with his club by August 2022, so it doesn't seem to be an injury concern here. So Nelson Semedo has been with Portugal since 2015 and has 24 caps and no goals in that time, and is currently 29 years old. And he's one of several players who played for Wolverhampton in England since 2020 in his case. And prior to that, he was with Barcelona in Spain for 3 years and was with Benfica as his first senior club, Benfica in Portugal. His first tournament was the 2017 Confederations Cup. He started 2 of the games there, games 3 and 5, and he got 3 yellow cards in that tournament, and 2 of them added up to a red card in extra time of game 5. But in game 5. So for the 2018 World Cup, he was on the preliminary squad, Nelson Semedo, but he didn't make the final cut. But in Euro 2020, he was a starter. Perhaps João Cancelo would have been the starter, but he was out with COVID. So Nelson Semedo getting the start in the Euro 2020. He actually had a tremendous collision in a game against Hungary there, and kind of flipped like a fish on a frying pan, and perhaps not a great tournament for him because he also gave up a penalty to France, Kylian Mbappe drawing a penalty from him. So Nelson Semedo, just a possible candidate here. And we also have Cedric Soares. So he didn't start any of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, but he was on the bench for 2 and not selected for 11 others, including the last 4 matches. So he does seem to be on his way out. Cedric Soares has been with the team since 2014, and has 33 caps and 1 goal, and is 31 years old. So Cedric Soares plays for Arsenal in England, and prior to that was with Southampton in England for 5 years. He was actually loaned out to Inter Milan in 2019 there, and his Portuguese club was Sporting Lisbon. He played with them from 2010 to 15, and with their youth club for 12 years on the youth club since 7 years of age. And by the way, he usually has Cedric on the back of his shirt, or at least did so in 2016. So 2016 was his first tournament, actually. And he didn't appear in any of the first 3 games, but then he gained a starting position for the last 4. And like a couple of players we've said before, only one of Portugal's 5 goals that they allowed was scored under his watch. So he did well in those last 3 games, going all the way to the final with them. For the 2017 Confederation Cup, Cedric Suarez was a starter, and he started 3 of the games, didn't appear in 2 of them, and actually scored a goal in that tournament too. For the 2018 World Cup, he was a starter also, but he lost his starting position for Game 4 in that tournament, so didn't appear there. And he handled the ball in the box there in the 2018 World Cup against Iran and gave away a soft penalty. It was a soft penalty, and allowed Iran their late equalizer. He wasn't selected, however, for the 2020 Euro Cup, and seems to have drifted further off the team since Cedric Suarez. So those are the 4 candidates for the right back position. But in this case, it's a kind of a transfer of custody of the position from Nelson Semedo, who played the first 3 games of the Cup. Diogo Dalot played the last game of the Cup. But when João Cancelo came back, he played in the World Cup qualification games in 5 of the 7 games, with Semedo and Dalot each starting once. And then João Cancelo started all 4 of the Nations League games. So the position seems quite firmly in his grip. All right, let's move on to, well, we don't have any general defenders. And we move on to the midfielders. And we start with defensive midfielders. Here we have Ruben Neves as a likely candidate, and also João Palhinha as a likely candidate. So just the 2 defensive midfielders, but we're going to do central midfielders before the summary, because these positions often overlap. So actually, and we saw Danilo Pereira is also coded as a defensive midfielder, but we covered him as a central defender since he's played that position more often. So we begin with Ruben Neves, and he has he started 4 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, and he was also subbed in for 4 and on the bench for 2. So out with injury for 2 and not selected for 1 match, Ruben Neves. Ruben Neves has been with Portugal since 2015 and has 32 caps and is 25 years old. Another of the several players who play for Wolverhampton in England, but he's been there for quite a while, since 2017. He moved from Porto, that was his first club, and his youth club too, Porto in Portugal. So despite being on the team since 2017, he wasn't a part of the 2016 Euro Cup squad or the 2017 Confederations Cup squad. As far as World Cup 2018, he made the preliminary squad, but didn't make the final cut. And so Euro 2020 was his first tournament where he was a substitute, appearing only in Game 3, where he was subbed in. So certainly a difficult time getting a starting position on the squad. And we'll see that there's really a flood of midfielders. So pretty hard to work your way in as a starter amidst the talent that they have. Nevertheless, we think he will be at the Cup. He's a likely candidate to be. And we have João Palhinha also as a likely candidate. He started 4 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, and he was subbed in for 4 and on the bench for 3. So 2 matches that he wasn't selected for. And he has been with Portugal just since 2021, despite being 27 years old, so a bit of a late starter for them. But he has 15 caps and 2 goals in that time, so is actually getting good field time with Portugal here. He moved to Fulham in England in 2022. So a new move from Sporting Lisbon, where he played from 2016 to 2022. He was loaned out a little bit, but Sporting Lisbon was his final youth club and his first senior club. So João Paulinho, I should have said, no, 2020. I always get confused. So his first game was in the 2020 Euro Cup, although that was in 2021. That's what confused me there for a minute. And in that Euro Cup, he was subbed into Game 3 at halftime and went on to start Game 4 there. So kind of working his way into the team. He also scored 2 of their 22 goals in qualifying. 1 in each of their games against Luxembourg, actually. So João Paulinho, a defensive midfielder. And again, we won't summarize the position until we've gone through central midfielders here. So let's take a look. And again, here we have a player coded as a central midfielder, Bruno Fernandes, but actually he plays more upfield as more like an attacking midfielder. So played left midfield a few times. And we've moved him to left midfield for our discussion of him. Meanwhile, on the more defensive end of the midfield, we have William Carvalho as a likely candidate for central midfield. And we have Matheus Nunes as a likely candidate. And we have Renato Sanchez as a possible candidate. And Vitinha as a possible candidate. And I'll also say that we moved João Moutinho, who's coded as a central midfielder, but he has really played all over the field during this period. So we've created a category called versatile midfielder for him and a couple of other players because they just can't stay still in the same spot. So a lot of movement around the midfield. There. So we'll stick with these 4 candidates to talk about and deal with Bruno Fernandes and João Moutinho a little bit later. So William Carvalho then started 3 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup. He was subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 5 and not selected for 3 matches, but those were the first 3 matches after the Euro Cup there. William Carvalho has been with Portugal since 2013 and has 75 caps and 5 goals. He's 30 years old. So he plays for Real Betis in Spain and has done so since 2018 and was with Sporting Lisbon for a long time before that, from 2011. And Sporting Lisbon was his final youth club as well. The 2014 World Cup was his first tournament, and he subbed into that tournament into Game 2 at halftime and went on to finish Game 3. In 2016, kind of similarly, he didn't appear in Game 1, but gained a starting position for all remaining games. He also got 3 yellow cards, but he didn't get a red. They were all in different games, but he was suspended in Game 6 for an accumulation of cards. For the 2017 Confederations Cup, he was a starter, and in the 2018 World Cup and 2020 Euro Cup, also a starter. In the case of the 2020 Euro Cup, though, after Game 2, he was relegated to the bench and not even on the bench for Game 4. So kind of drifted off the team there. And yeah, it doesn't seem to be a starter for Portugal with just 3 of their 13 games as a starter, but does seem a likely candidate to make it to the squad, William Carvalho. Next, we have Matthias Nunes. So he got his first cap in October 2021 and started 2 of their remaining 10 games. He was subbed in for 6 and not selected for 2 others. So Matthias Nunes is new to Portugal, just 24 years old, and got his first cap in 2021 and has since earned 9 caps and 1 goal. Yet another player for Wolverhampton in England. He's a recent arrival, moving there in 2022 from Sporting Lisbon. And he scored 1 of their goals in qualifying. Actually, 1 of the goals in the semi-final playoff game at home to Turkey. There. Okay, next we have Renato Sanchez. And he started 1 of their 13 games, actually started it as a left midfielder. 1 of their 13 games since the Euro Cup, and was subbed in for 1. He was actually out with 2 separate injuries for 5 of the games, and not selected for 6, including the last 4 matches. So we only have him as a possible here. He has been with Portugal since 2016, so started at a very young age. He's just 25 years old, so it looks like he was 19 when he got his first cap there. And he has 32 caps and 3 goals, and plays for Paris Saint-Germain in France since 2022. So he has a good resume too. Played with Lille in France from 2019 to 22, and Bayern Munich before that, 2016 to 19. Fans of the Premier League may remember that he was loaned to Swansea in 2017 and 18. That didn't work out that well for him. And his Portuguese club was Benfica, his first senior club and youth club there. So he showed great promise as a youngster. Didn't really live up to that promise, but seems to be doing so if he earned the interest of Paris Saint-Germain. 2016 was his first tournament. He was subbed into games 1, 3, and 4, and then gained a starting position for the last 3 games. However, he was not selected for the 2017 Confederations Cup or the 2018 World Cup. For Euro 2020, he was just a substitute, at least for the first 2 games, when he subbed into game 2 at halftime and got a starting position for games 3 and 4 there. So actually finally showed his potential in a tournament there with some notable plays against Germany and Belgium. So Renato Sanchez, a possible candidate, and Vitinha, probably less probable, I would say, than Sanchez. He got his first appearance on the bench in March 2022 and started 1 of their remaining 6 games. But he was subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 1, and out with coronavirus for 2 games. So he is with Paris Saint-Germain also, just like Renato Sanchez. However, he has been loaned out. He's with them. He was with Portugal prior to that, and that's where he was loaned out to. Guess to whom he was loaned out. It was Wolverhampton in England. So, but now he's with Paris Saint-Germain. So some good club affiliations there, but it looks like they're only possible candidates to reach the cup, Renato Sanchez and Vitinha. And now that we've finished central midfielders, we can go back and summarize this position. So it's almost always one central midfielder if you look at their formations, primarily the 4-3-3. Only in 2 games was a pair of central midfielders, and in 4 of the games it was that 4-1-4-1 with the single central midfielder being a stopper with other midfielders in front of him. And so it's usually kind of a defensive midfielder position. So defensive midfielder Danilo Pereira, who we met now as a central defender. He actually played in the cup in this position, and one time he was paired with central midfielder William Carvalho, but two times it was Danilo Pereira as a stopper. And it was actually João Paulinho came in game 4 when they moved to a 4-3-3 formation. And João Paulinho continued playing into the World Cup qualifying games. So basically played the first half of those World Cup qualifiers. And then João Moutinho came into the position for the second half. Matheus Nunes did play the lone central midfielder once in World Cup qualifying there. And in the Nations League, it was João Moutinho for the first game, and defensive midfielder Ruben Neves, who actually had been tried out in one of the friendlies after that. Okay, let's move on to our next category, which is the group of players I've put as general or versatile midfielders. These are 3 players who have kind of been all over the field. And they're all definite candidates, so that's why we talk about the glut of kind of central midfielder players, almost too much talent, you could say. And we have Bruno Fernandes as the first definite candidate, and Bernardo Silva also. Now, Bruno Fernandes is coded as a central midfielder, and Bernardo Silva as an attacking midfielder primarily. And, I was wrong. This one is not definite, but likely João Moutinho. And he's coded as a central midfielder primarily too. And all 3 of them kind of played all over the field. So let's take a look at Bruno Fernandes. He started 9 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, and he was subbed in for the 4 others. So it looks like a definite candidate to us. Bruno Fernandes first started with Portugal in 2017 and has amassed 48 caps and 9 goals, and he's 28 years old, and he plays for Manchester United in England and was with Sporting Lisbon before that. But that wasn't his first club. He was actually with several clubs in Italy from 2012 to 2017, Sampdoria, Udinese, and Novara. And actually, Novara was his last youth club, but Boa Vista was his main youth club for 8 years. And Bruno Fernandes' first tournament was the 2018 World Cup. He started game 1 there, but subbed out at 68 and then lost his starting position, appearing only in game 2 as a substitute after that. For the Euro 2020, though, he started games 1 and 2, and whoops, it looks like he lost his starting position in that one too. So started games 1 and 2, subbed out of both of those, and then only used as a substitute after that. So Bruno Fernandes, though, a definite candidate now, and as we said, plays all over the field, left midfield, right midfield, and attacking midfield also. Bernardo Silva started 8 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup. He was subbed in for 3 and on the bench for 1, and the only match he missed was one he was injured for. Bernardo Silva has been with Portugal since 2015, and he has 72 caps and 8 goals, and he too is 28 years old. Plays for Manchester City in England and has done so since 2017. He came from Monaco in the French league there and was with Benfica in Portugal as his first club from 2013 to 15. Benfica was also his youth club for 10 years, actually. He started before Bruno Fernandes there. Actually, he was... he got a thigh injury, so it's difficult to say whether he would have been selected for the 2016 Cup, because I think he got a thigh injury before any selections were made. But he was on the squad for the 2017 Confederations Cup. Didn't appear in games 1 and 5, but was a starter for the 3 games in between there. And 2018 World Cup, he was a starter. in all 4 games except for game 3 where he was a substitute. And 2020 started all 4 games there, subbing out of each one. He didn't score any goals in the 2020 Euro Cup, but he did score 1 goal in qualifying for this 2022 World Cup. He played as a more defensive left midfielder and right midfielder a couple of times. He also played as a central attacking midfielder a couple of times and as a right winger, so really all over the midfield there. João Moutinho is our 3rd versatile midfielder, and he played central midfield and left and right midfield. So all 3 midfield positions in that 4-3-3, if you want to imagine it that way. João Moutinho started 7 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, and he was subbed in for 4 and on the bench for 1, and perhaps we moved him down to likely both because of his age and because he wasn't selected for that last match in June. So in terms of age, he's 37 years old. He's been with Portugal since 2005 and has 145 caps and 7 goals. Wow. Another who plays for Wolverhampton in England, he has done so since 2018 and was with Monaco in the French league for 5 years before that, and Porto in Portugal. A player who played for both Porto and Sporting Lisbon there, and Sporting Lisbon was actually his youth club. So João Moutinho got his first tournament in 2008 for the 2008 Euro Cup, but he wasn't selected for the 2010 World Cup. He was on a 7-man standby squad there, but he was a starter in most of the cups after that. The Euro 2012 and 2016, actually lost his starting position in the 2016 Cup, and also in the World Cup 2008 and World Cup 2014 and 2018. Lost his starting position in the World Cup 2018 too after game 2. And for the Euro 2020, it was the inverse. He subbed into games 1 and 2 and then gained a starting position for the games after that. So not necessarily a starter in every cup. And even if he does start, doesn't always remain a starter until the end. But João Moutinho, a likely candidate. So we don't have any review of the position here. Rather, these players are kind of in several positions. So you're going to hear their names come up in the next few sections here. And remember that that's not the only position he played. Actually, we are going to summarize left midfielders because we don't actually have any candidates coded as left midfielders. So the position is only used in the 4-3-3 formation. So the left midfielder is on the in the 4-3, the second set of 3 on the left side of that. And otherwise, we use wingers or left attacking midfielders to describe these players. So think of it as a more defensive role in a 4-3-3. So it was only used once in the Cup, in the final game of the Euro Cup, and Renato Sanchez was in the position. Bruno Fernandes and João Moutinho shared the position, kind of alternated in the World Cup qualification, and Bernardo Silva came in for the last game. And then it continued to be a variety of players, Bernardo Silva, William Carvalho, and Bruno Fernandes, each playing at once in Nations League games and the position not used in the other game. So, a big variety of players over there. And right midfielders, well, we do have one or a couple of players coded as right midfielders. So Goncalo Guedes and Otavio are both coded as right midfielders, but they've been playing the right attacking midfielder, kind of more offensive-minded players. So we're going to, we move them to right attacking midfielders who we'll talk to a little bit later. In terms of who's been playing in the position then, again, it's rarely the same player twice, except for Bruno Fernandes, who held it 4 times. Again, it was only used once in the Cup, and that was João Moutinho. And in World Cup qualifying, a variety of players, Bernardo Silva, João Paulinho, Renato Sanchez, and Bruno Fernandes twice. And Bruno Fernandes also in the first 2 games of the Nations League. That makes up his 4 appearances in the role. And then in the last game, it was central midfielder Vitinha who took the position there. So pretty confusing, both on the right and left side of that 4-3-3 midfield position. And let's move over to talk about left wingers. So this position has only been used 3 times, twice in the Cup and once in Nations League. But we do have several players who are coded as left wingers, so we will look at them here. The first one is Diogo Jota, so he is a likely candidate. And the next one is Rafael Leao, also a likely candidate. We have Richard Horta as a left winger, as a possible candidate. And finally, Pedro Neto as a player who seems to be off the team. So let's go back to Diogo Jota. He started 7 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup. He was subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 1, and 3 matches that he was not selected for. So he was out actually with a hamstring injury in August of this year, 2022, but he came back in early September, and now he seems to be back in action for the team. So his team is Liverpool, but I'll give you his biodata for Portugal first. Diogo Jota has been with Portugal since 2019, and he has 29 caps and a healthy 10 goals for the 26-year-old. And as I started to say, plays for Liverpool in England. And lo and behold, it's Wolverhampton that he came from, where so many Portuguese players seem to have played recently. He was with Wolves from 2018 to 20 and Atletico Madrid before that. So actually his first team in Portugal was Pecos de Ferreira, and he was with them at the end of his youth career too. In terms of tournaments, his first tournament was the Euro 2020, where he started all 4 games and scored 1 of their goals in that tournament. And in qualifying, he scored quite a few goals, 5 of their 22 goals there, making him their second highest scorer. So both Liverpool and Portugal happy to have him back in their squad. Rafael Leao is a young player. He got his first cap in October 2021 and started 2 of their remaining 10 games. And he was subbed in for 7 and on the bench for the others. So always called up after first being called up in October 2021. So 11 caps since 2021 for the 23-year-old. He plays for AC Milan in Italy, and has done so since 2019, was with Lille for a year before that, and Sporting Lisbon as his first senior club and his youth club for 9 years. Ricardo Horta returned actually after an almost 8-year absence in June 2022. Didn't start any of their remaining 4 games there, but he was subbed in for 3. And he had been with the team since 2014, but only earned a cap or 2 in 2014 before not being selected for 8 years. So in total has 5 caps and 1 goal, and is 28 years old. And he's with Braga in Portugal and was with Malaga in Spain before that. Pedro Neto last appeared for the national team in March 2021, and he was out with a knee injury from then until March 2022. But he did come back. Out with a knee injury for a year that time and hasn't made it back to the squad since. So he has 3 goals and 3 caps and 1 goal for Portugal since 2020. Just 22 years old, so lots of time for him to come back. And he is another one with Wolverhampton in England since 2019 and was with Braga in Portugal before that. So Pedro Neto doesn't look like he'll be part of this squad in terms of his recent participation, but there's always an outside hope. And again, we'll summarize the position. So as I said, left winger position has only been used those 3 times, and it was Diogo Jota every time. So keep these players in mind, Diogo Jota and Rafael Leao particularly, because they also cover the left attacking midfielder role. Excuse me, I had to turn the mic off to cough there. Over on the other side, on the right wing, we have just 2 candidates who seem to be off the team, so very much outside candidates, but they have played since 2021, so we include them here. Pedro Goncalves and Trincao, both right wingers who seem to be off the team. So let's go back to Pedro Goncalves, and he last appeared for the national team in the 2018 World Cup. However, he was selected for the 2020 Euro Cup, which I'll get to in a second. So Pedro Goncalves got his first cap in 2021 and has 2 caps. He's just 24 years old, so again, we may see him in the future. He is with Sporting Lisbon in Portugal. He also played for Famalicão in Portugal, and believe it or not, Wolverhampton Wanderers in England in 2018-19. Actually, he was with Wolverhampton Wanderers Youth Club for the last part of his youth career, having moved over from Valencia's youth club. So, as I said, on the roster for the 2020 Euro Cup, but didn't see any action in that squad and has not played actually since 2018. Oh no, what have I been saying? It's not the 2018 World Cup, it's the 2020 Euro Cup. That was his last appearance for the squad. So Pedro Goncalves seemingly off the squad, as is Trincao. He didn't start any of their games since the 2021 Euro Cup. He was subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 1, though, and not selected for 11 others, including the last 10 matches. So selected for a couple of games after the Euro Cup there, but has been off the team for most of the time since then. Trincao has been with Portugal since 2020 and has 7 caps and is just 23 years old. And he plays for Barcelona in Spain since 2020. However, he has been loaned out and is currently with Sporting Lisbon. And what do you know, Wolverhampton Wanderers he was loaned out to in 2021. Prior to Barcelona in 2020, he was with Braga in Portugal, and that was his last youth club as well. So Trincao was not part of the 2020 World Cup. 2020 Euro Cup. I'm really losing myself here. But he was with the under 21 team for some of those games in the lead up to the Euro Cup. So yeah, struggling to get into the squad despite being with Barcelona, or on the roster at least for Barcelona in Spain. But 23 years old, another player that we'll probably see in the future. So again, summary of the right wing is similar to the left. It was only used 3 times, twice in the Cup and once in Nations League. And in terms of the player who played the position, it was the ubiquitous Bernardo Silva playing it twice, and then right midfielder Goncalo Guedes playing it once. And we'll talk about Goncalo Guedes as a right attacking midfielder shortly. Okay, that in a sense brings us to the artificial line that we draw between midfield and attack, because we've been putting attacking midfielders, and in the case of Portugal, left and right attacking midfielders as part of the forward line. So we'll continue in that tradition and introduce the attacking midfielders too. And we have just a likely candidate, just a possible candidate in João Mario. And we also have a retired player in Rafa Silva. So I'll tell you that story. Soon. Okay, let's look at the candidates coded as attacking midfielder. And I should add, actually, Bernardo Silva, who we did under versatile players, is coded as an attacking midfielder too, but we moved him to include him in the versatile midfielder discussion. So João Mario returned after an almost 2-year absence in September 2021 and started 2 of their remaining 13 games, subbed in for 2 and injured for 2, but then not selected for the last 6 matches. And João Mario has been with Portugal since 2014. He has 52 caps and 2 goals and is 28 years old. And he plays for Benfica in Portugal and has a good resume here. He was with Inter Milan from 2016 to 21. He was loaned to Sporting Lisbon during that time, and Lokomotiv Moscow and West Ham in England, loaned to all of those clubs, and was with Sporting Lisbon, basically with Sporting Lisbon before that, and his youth club is Sporting Lisbon too. So he was part of the he was not part of the 2014 World Cup. He was selected for the 30-man preliminary squad there, but he didn't make the final cut. However, he was selected for the 2016 Euro Cup, and he started all 7 games in that cup. A muscle injury kept him out of the 2017 Confederations Cup, and for the 2018 World Cup, he was subbed into Game 1 and then gained a starting position for the remaining 3 games in that cup. So I'm surprised he hasn't. He was off for 2 years there, because he's a pretty familiar character to me, and he was not part of the Euro 2020. That was during his 2-year absence, and for some reason I just have the feeling that he should be part of Portugal's squad. So just based on instinct alone, I'm going to suggest that he's one of the more likely players that we have in the possible category to make it onto the team, or he has been on the team, so make it back onto the team, I should more accurately say. He did play as a left midfielder, a more defensive role, left midfielder once, but he's coded as an attacking midfielder, and really has played all over the field for Portugal. Rafa Silva is an interesting case. So he last appeared on the team on the bench in September 2021, and then wasn't selected after that. But he looked like he might be a candidate, but he announced his retirement from the national team in September 2022. So that must have been very recently, citing personal reasons for leaving the team. So he's only 28 years old, and was with the team from 2014 to 2021. And he has 25 caps or he had, I should say, 25 caps and 0 goals. 0 goals, not that good for an attacking midfielder. And he still is playing club soccer. He's playing for Benfica in Portugal and has done so since 2016. So, kind of off the team. I won't go into too much detail. On the roster for the 2014 World Cup, but didn't see any action. And part of the team for the Euro 2016 and Euro 2020. I don't have anything on him for the 2018. So either my files were lacking or he wasn't part of it. I'll have to check into that. But anyway, Rafa Silva, then somewhat surprisingly off the team, having announced his retirement. So those are the two candidates as central attacking midfielders. And however, I'll just finish with a summary of the position because it really wasn't either of these players. So in the 4-3-3 formation, it was generally a defensive midfielder or a central midfielder in the center of the midfield, not really an attacking midfielder. In the other formations, though, it was usually Bruno Fernandes in the Cup, in the Euro Cup, with William Carvalho stepping up when it was a pair of attacking midfielders, such as in the 4-1-4-1 formation. And Bernardo Silva also played the role of central attacking midfielder one time. Okay, let's move on to left attacking midfielder. So again, a position used quite a bit because they favor the 4-3-3 formation. So these would be really left and right forwards in that formation. So actually, we don't have any candidates in this position because I think we've covered them all already. For the left attacking midfielder, it was the left wingers who covered the role. So we met them with left wingers Diego Jota and also the forwards Andre Silva and Cristiano Ronaldo each moved over once in World Cup qualifying into this role. In the Nations League, it was Diogo Jota and Rafael Leao, each playing the right forward position twice. So again, the position covered by players coded as left wingers for the most part. On the right attacking midfielder side, we do have a couple of candidates to introduce. So although he's coded as a right midfielder, we moved him to right attacking midfielder, and that's Goncalo Guedes, and also Otavio, same situation, coded as a right midfielder, but covered as a right attacking midfielder here. So Goncalo Guedes started 4 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, and he was subbed in for 5 and on the bench for 3 and not selected for just 1 match there. So Goncalo Guedes has been with Portugal since 2015 and has 32 caps and 7 goals. He's still just 25 years old, though. No, 26, sorry. And yet another player who's playing for Wolverhampton Wanderers in England. He recently moved there, though, just in 2022. And he was playing with Valencia in Spain for 4 years before that and had a short time in Paris Saint-Germain too, although he seems to have been loaned out for his whole time there to Valencia. Prior to that, he was with Benfica from 2014 to 17, and that was his youth club as well. Goncalo Guedes didn't make the team for the Euro 2016 or the 2017 Confederation Cup, even though he got his first cap before both of those. However, he was a starter in the 2018 World Cup, except for Game 3, where he was subbed in very late. And he didn't get any goals in that 2018 World Cup. By the 2020 Euro Cup, he was not a starter. He was on the roster but saw no action. And he did score 2 of the goals in qualifying for Euro 2020. So Goncalo Guedes, currently a likely candidate. Otavio, similarly a likely candidate, got his first appearance on the bench in September 2021, so just after the Euro Cup, and started 6 of their remaining 13 games, subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 1, but not selected for 4 games. And Otavio has played with Portugal since 2021, even though he is 27 years old, and he only has 7 caps and 2 goals, so a bit of a struggle to make it onto the squad. Actually, he was born in Brazil and did play his youth clubs in Brazil, as well as his first senior club, which was Internacional, but is now playing for Portugal. After he moved over from Brazil in 2014, he played for Porto, but was loaned out to Vitória Guimarães in Portugal. So Otávio got one of their goals in World Cup qualifying, actually, and that was in the semi-final playoff game at home to Turkey. And he is a likely candidate here. Okay, so let's summarize the position of right attacking midfielder. Again, in the 4-3-3, it's used quite a bit. And we saw Bernardo Silva playing as the right winger in the few times that they used that position. And so he also played in this position in the Euro Cup and about half the time in World Cup qualifying. And then a few other players were used in World Cup qualifying. Rafa Silva, Goncalo Guedes, and Otávio, who we met here, each starting once in World Cup qualifying, as Bernardo Silva was playing in other positions. In the friendlies, it was Guedes and Otávio, but in the Nations League, it was just Otávio kind of taking over the position. So it'll be interesting to see if he's able to retain it in the September games. For secondary strikers, we do have one candidate at the possible level, and that is João Felix. So coded as a secondary striker. João Felix didn't start any of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, but he was subbed in for 4. Although he was out with 2 separate injuries for 7 games, including the last 4 matches. So for those June games, he was out with a muscle injury, but he has been back in action with his squad in September. And his squad is Atletico Madrid, but wait, I should do his Portugal career or stats first. João Felix has been with Portugal since 2019 and has 23 caps and 3 goals, and he is 23 years old. So João Felix played for Atletico Madrid in Spain, as I mentioned, since 2019, and was with Benfica before that, Benfica being his youth club and his first senior club. But actually, he spent more time with Porto's youth club, just the last 3 years spent with Benfica's youth club, whereas he spent 7 years with Porto's youth club from 2008 to 15. Okay, so no real summary of the secondary striker position. I suppose if he comes onto the field, it's more in some kind of attacking midfielder role, or possibly as a forward. But since he didn't start any games, we don't really know. But probably subbing in for forwards or attacking midfielders. And speaking of forwards, we move on to the available forwards or the candidate. And here we have Cristiano Ronaldo as a definite candidate, and Andre Silva also as a definite candidate. And believe it or not, that's all we have for players coded as forwards. So not much need to introduce Cristiano Ronaldo. If you haven't heard of him, then you must be brand new to soccer. So Cristiano Ronaldo, very famous. I'll just go over the main details here because I could tell 45 minutes worth of information for this player. No, I'll cover his recent history though, because he has started 9 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup. He was subbed in for 1 and suspended for 1 and rested for 1 and not selected for 1 other. So anyway, still a fairly regular starter for Portugal. And he has been with Portugal since 2003, I should say, and has a staggering 191 caps and an more staggering 117 goals for Cristiano Ronaldo. Still seems very fit at 37 years old. But yeah, I mean, must be coming to the end of his career sometime soon. He's the captain of Portugal now, and he's in his second stint with Manchester United in England since 2021, having played in Juventus and Juventus for 3 years and Real Madrid for 9 years before that. And his first stint with Manchester United was from 2003 to 2009. He's actually a product of the Sporting Lisbon Youth Academy and spent his first couple of years with their senior team. So way back in 2004 Euro Cup, he was new to the scene and was just a substitute in that cup, if you can believe Cristiano Ronaldo being a substitute. But that only lasted 2 games, and then he became a starter, and from that time forward was a starter in all tournaments. So 2006, 2010, 2014, 2018 World Cups, and then every Euro Cup in between. Named to the team of the tournament several times. Golden Boot player, scored goals. What can I say about Cristiano Ronaldo? Just an amazing player, and still amazing at 37 years old. 37 years old? Yeah, 37 years old. So yes, it would be shocking to not see him in the cup. Even though he seems to be in a bit of dispute with Man United at the current time. And controversy we can add to the list of his resume. Let's move on to Andre Silva. Andre Silva started 7 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, and he was subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 4. So Andre Silva has been with Portugal since 2016 and has 51 caps and a healthy 19 goals and is 27 years old. So Andre Silva plays for Leipzig in Germany since 2021 and with Eintracht Frankfurt in Germany before that. From 2017 to 20, he was with AC Milan, but he was loaned out to Eintracht Frankfurt as well as Sevilla during his spell with AC Milan. Prior to that, he was with Porto, and that's kind of the club he emerged from in Portugal, playing 3 years, basically the last 3 years of his youth career with them and the first 2 years of his senior career. So Andre Silva, his first tournament was the 2017 Confederations Cup. He subbed into game 1 there and gained a starting position for the remaining games. He did miss a penalty, actually, against Mexico in that tournament. And for the 2018 World Cup, Andre Silva was subbed into games 1 and 3 was subbed into 2 of the games at least, and didn't score any of their goals despite having scored 9 of their 32 goals in qualifying there. For the Euro 2020, though, Andre Silva was just a substitute coming into 3 of their games, and recently he scored 1 of their 22 goals in World Cup qualifying. So Andre Silva, the second forward we have on the list here, and like Cristiano Ronaldo, a definite candidate. But that's it. That's all we have for forwards. So that brings us to the end of our player-by-player discussion, and we move on to a discussion of the squad. Before we do that, I should talk about my shirt. You may have noticed, the YouTube watchers, that it's not quite a Portugal shirt. And once again, I confess to the poverty of my shirts, but I have at least tried to color match, as I have to do with so many teams. That's as good as I can do. But I promise to work on my shirt collection after this World Cup. And hey, maybe some Portuguese fan could, kind of throw a shirt my way. Maybe one that a player wore on the field. Okay, I'll move on. let's talk about a few notes. So we'll kind of go back to the notes that we had at the top of the podcast in the takeaways section, takeaways from our previous podcast. So I won't repeat the stuff on that's kind of focused on the team. Just briefly, I'll say we talked about the what and the how. And what we meant by that was the what is their results in tournament, which are quite good. But the how is a bit less convincing because they tend to not win group stages or group qualification stages, and have a few kind of shudders along the way. So not as convincing in qualification or in a close analysis as they are, or they seem to be in a kind of a superficial overview of their final results. Finally, we also pointed out that the friendlies, two friendlies they played against Qatar, were experimental. But we also noted that maybe it was the start of our third point, moving to a rotation system. So, as we've seen with actually many teams in the previews to these cups, the previews to these teams in the cup, there seems to be a bit of a trend going on with teams using a rotation system of two players in several positions, rather than the traditional format of having kind of a starter and a backup. So we saw this very clearly in a couple of positions for Portugal, where it used to be a starter and a backup, and now seems to be an alternating position between two players. So that makes it a bit difficult to predict starters, and we've had to start using a different color coding of yellow to denote players who, they're not the clear starter, but they will probably get some starts. And we also use yellow for two players that seem to alternate starts. So rotation, kind of a thing in this 2022 World Cup. The other point we want to talk about was this: is this the end of a generation? We have seen, and we will see more clearly shortly, that a lot of the players in this generation are getting older. Around the turn of the century, Portugal's performance record picked up with what was called the golden generation, kind of led by Luis Figo. And that took them from a team who often didn't qualify for cups to a team that regularly qualified and actually regularly passed the group stage. So sometimes among the top teams in Europe. And we also noted that they had done well to replace that generation in what I call the Cristiano Ronaldo generation. And they remained at that high standard of reaching cups and passing group stages for the most part. Now, that generation, the Ronaldo generation, is coming to an end. And it's not just him, but a few players alongside of him, which we'll talk about soon. And the question is, are they aging out? Does this mean Portugal will go back to being a fairly, second tier, let's say, team in Europe? Or are they producing enough players that they can kind of keep this going and maybe even argue to becoming kind of permanently a top team in Europe? Well, we will see that they've done better than most. We have a few teams in this World Cup who, after the World Cup, we're a bit worried about because we know there's going to be a swath of their star players retiring. But when we look at club affiliations below, we'll see that Portugal was and continues to be regenerating quite nicely. And we'll leave it at that for now and move on to club affiliations. So this kind of demonstrates the point because their club affiliations are quite impressive. So we've seen a lot of players with Paris Saint-Germain, Nuno Mendes and Danilo, and other players who have been there in the past. Vitinha, who is just a possible candidate here, and Renato Sanchez also with Paris Saint-Germain and other top teams in England, for example, a couple of Manchester City players. We have Barcelona, I thought we had represented, Atletico Madrid, and then I should mention a couple, and of course top teams in Portugal too, Porto, Benfica, and Sporting Lisbon too. We have Borussia Dortmund in Germany also, and Italian teams. AC Milan in Italia, in Italy, Rafael Leao with AC Milan. And we've had, if there's not a lot of players now in Italy, there are players who have played for top clubs there before. Rui Patricio's with Roma. But interestingly, in addition to some top clubs in England like Manchester City and Man United, we also kind of have a gathering of Portuguese at Wolverhampton in England. So currently, I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 players. 6 players with Wolverhampton right now, and there's also players like Rui Patricio who have played with them in the past. One of them even with Wolverhampton's youth club. So kind of a little Portugal there in England, a gathering place. So impressive club affiliations for Portugal suggest that they are doing a good job renewing. Let's talk a little bit about some statistics. So I have been working on a few statistics. Excuse me, I just have to take a drink. Okay, sorry about that. The first statistic we look at is how many players they have on the slate. And Portugal has 42 players who have played for the team since 2021. And that compares with an average of 49. So Portugal dealing with a smaller group of players to select from. But as we've seen, it's a pretty impressive group of players. And even the way it is, they'll probably have to cut some players that many teams would bring to the cup. We've seen that some of their players with top clubs, even Ruben Diaz with Manchester City, despite that good club affiliation, has difficulty getting onto the club as a starter, at least onto Portugal. So they're very rich in terms of players, despite having less than average in their total pool of players. And then as far as the serious candidates, those that we coded as definite, likely, or possible, it's 35. The average is 33, so not really much to talk about there. It's pretty average number. And the number of definite or likely candidates is 23. Which is slightly higher than the average of 21.5, suggesting that they've pretty much chosen their squad. We've pretty much seen what their squad is going to be like. There may be a couple of injuries, players going out. There may be a couple of players in good form coming in. But even the way it is, since they got to bring 26 players to the club, it'll probably just be 3 or 4 or so of the possible players that we talked about in the Player by Player podcast. Only 3 or 4 of them will actually make the final squad. So the squad pretty much decided for Portugal. In terms of age, they are one of the oldest squads with an average age of 27.4. And the overall average for the teams that we've done is actually quite high, 26.9. So the players in this World Cup, I think, a bit older on average than previous World Cup. But Portugal is still one of the oldest among them. And part of the reason for that is they have some very senior players. Pepe is 39 years old, Jose Fonte 38, Cristiano Ronaldo 37, and João Moutinho 36. Most squads only have maybe one player anywhere of that age, if they have any at all. But Portugal has those 4 players. However, overall, they only have 7 players who are 30 or above. So most of their players are in their mid to late 20s. And if we go to the bottom of the scale, we have 8 players who are 23 or younger. So that kind of balances out the scale a little bit, but tends to be on the older side. And not a bad thing at all, because it gives them great experience. Their average number of caps among these players is 40.2, and that is extremely high, maybe the highest among all teams. No, Belgium has more caps per player, but only Belgium is higher. And wait, no, Qatar is higher. The average, anyway, is 29.9. So they're 25% higher than other teams. So a very experienced squad. Also a squad that has a lot of goals amongst them. And this one really is by far the highest. 220 goals among these players. The average is 131. And in terms of goals per cap, total goals per player, it's not per player, it's per cap. So I've come up with this statistic that just kind of measures this, and they are 16.2%. The average is 13.6%, so they're significantly higher, and one of the highest. So I'll just tell you, Argentina and Germany are both 17.5%, and then the next team is France with 16.8%, and you'll never guess who is 4th. I'll give you a moment to think about it. Poland, not a team I really think of as a high-scoring team, but they're 4th, and Portugal is just behind them. So no problem for Portugal getting goals, and they get them all over the field as well. So I'll just go over some stats for goals before we move on, and that is Cristiano Ronaldo with a staggering 61%. That means he scores a goal every 2 out of 3 games, and there I would dare say there's very few players, if any, at that ratio. They also have Andre Silva at 37% and Diogo Jota at 34%. Those are really good numbers. Defender Diego Dallo is 33%, but it's 2 goals in 6 games. So we don't really take the number seriously unless they have more than 20 games under their belt. Goncalo Guedes has 7 goals in 32 games. That's pretty respectable at 22%. And then several players in the high teens. So overall, a good scoring team, Portugal, and players from all over the field putting the ball in the net for them. All right, next we're going to move on to players and issues to watch. Starting in the defense with the goalkeeper position. So Patricio Rui and Diogo Costa. This is one of several pairings where we see a move from a kind of starter with a backup to a rotation system in the Nations League game. So initially it was kind of Patricio Rui, and then the secondary keeper who would only get on if Rui was injured or something like that. Now in the Nations League games in June, we saw them kind of rotating. So each of them played two games. Will that be the way it is in the Cup too? And as mentioned, there's several positions where that's the case. The next issue, though, is there room for Ruben Diaz? So in central defense, we have Pepe, and we have the defensive midfielder Danilo kind of drafted in, and that's the central pairing. But Ruben Diaz plays for Manchester City. Hard to believe that a player of a club of that stature is kind of being a substitute. So will the Manchester City player get a sniff of starting? In the right defense, we have Rafael Guerreiro. Left defense, Rafael Guerreiro and Nuno Mendes. Kind of a similar situation of starter and backup switching to a rotation. So I'm expecting both of those to get at least one start. On the right side, though, João Cancelo seems, by contrast, to be the definite starter there, ultimately replacing Nelson Semedo, who predominated in the cup. Although that might have been because João Cancelo was injured. Was out with coronavirus for the cup. In the midfield, one of the considerations is the formation changes. So the formation changes makes it a bit hard to pin down the midfield position. The 4-3-3 formation seems to have emerged as the favored formation, but that makes it a bewildering number of candidates rotating through those three midfielder positions. So a nice problem to have. In a sense, it's a problem of having too much talent, too many good players to fill just three positions. So I wonder what they're going to do in the cup with all that talent. On the attack, a similar situation with Diogo Jota and Rafael Leao as left attacker. Is one of them going to be a starter, or are they going to rotate as they did towards the end of the period we're talking about in the June Nations League games? On the right, similarly, is it Goncalo Guedes or Otavio? It looked like Goncalo Guedes was the main player, but then Otavio came in and played all the Nations League games. So is it going to be one or the other, or a rotation of both? And even up top, with Ronaldo and Andre Silva, Ronaldo was certainly the starter in the cup, but as the period wore on, Silva increasingly rotated in, and by the time Nations League came around, it was 2 games for each of them there as well. Let's move on to some new players that have joined the club, joined the national team. And I'm going to limit the discussion here to players that we coded as definite or likely, because otherwise it becomes a bit unwieldy. But a new player, Diogo Costa, in goal, seems to have become the backup keeper, if not a rotating starter. And he's just 23 years old, plays for Porto in Spain. And even though he joined the team in 2021, seems to have moved into become kind of a key player there. We have central midfielder Matthias Nunes. So he only started 2 of their 10 games, but we consider him likely because he was subbed in for 6 besides. He plays for Wolverhampton in England, as do so many of the Portuguese players. And he is 24 years old, never played in a tournament. Rafael Leao, we just looked at him as a left winger, possibly a starter, maybe a rotating starter. He's just 23 years old and plays for AC Milan in Italy, so a pretty good club affiliation there. He has been with Portugal since 2021, but already has 11 caps, so it looks like he's making good inroads into the teams. Unlike actually some other teams where a lot of the new players are kind of just at the possible level and haven't been used that much, but these players have really made inroads into the team. Finally, we have right midfielder Otavio. So he started 6 of their remaining 13 games after his first one in September 2021. He's not as young as the others, 27 years old, but he did get his first cap in 2021. And he, like Diogo Costa, the goalkeeper at the top, plays for Porto in Portugal. Let's look at some of the injuries. So Nelson Semedo was injured for the June matches, but as we noted in the Player-by-Player podcast, is back playing with his club by August 2022. So not really an issue there. And we also have Diogo Jota, who looked like he would be, was a bit touch and go at the beginning of the season. He was out with a hamstring injury in August, but he came back in early September, and he seems okay now. And finally, we have João Felix. and João Felix was a possible candidate, out with a muscle injury for the June games, but was back in action with his squad in September. So really, no injuries to worry about so far. And among these players, only one of them, Diogo Jota, is at the likely level or higher. So one gets the feeling they could afford to lose Nelson Semedo and João Felix without too much damage to the team. Finally, let's look at notable absences. So we have goalkeeper Anthony Lopez. Never really was a starter or anything like that, but he was a backup keeper in Euro 2016 and 20, and also in the World Cup 2018, but now seems to have made way for other players like Diogo Jota, who we just saw. Rafa Silva, kind of an interesting absence there. He looked like the 28-year-old was continuing with the team, having played in the 2020 Euro Cup. And after he last appeared on the bench shortly after the Euro Cup in September 2021, I sense, well, he wasn't called up after that, and in September 22, announced his retirement from the team for personal reasons. So still has a couple of years left in him, but has announced his retirement, so it's not a consideration for this cup. Bruno Alves is a central defender. He last appeared in the 2018 World Cup. He was just on the roster there. His prime years were around the 2010 and 2014 World Cup, but he hung up his boots for the national team after the 2018. I don't know if he announced his retirement, but his last appearance was in that World Cup, and he hung up his boots in 2022 as a club player also. Ricardo Quaresma, also missing. He was off the team by the time the Euro 2021 came around. He was just a sub in the 2018 World Cup and never much more than a substitute, but he did have 80 caps for the national team, and was at least on the bench for the 2018 World Cup. So a familiar name that we won't see at the World Cup. And that's it for notable absences. So we'll finish the podcast with the players who we predict are going to start. And we start with Fernando Santos. So he's been their manager since 2016. And it would be a bit late to get rid of him now. So we're going to call him a starter, the starting manager. Maybe I'll name the definite, unlikely, and any significant possible candidates before for our podcast listeners before talking about the starters. So for goalkeeper as a definite, we have Rio Patricio and Diogo Costa, both definite, and possible Jose Sa and Rui Silva. So probably one of those two making the third string keeper. And in this case, if there is to be a starter, I would say it's Patricio Rui. But I really think it's going to be a rotation with Diogo Costa, maybe not starting as much, but I think he will get a start in the cup, even if it's more than a kind of a B team game there. For central defenders, Pepe and Danilo Pereira have been a kind of a steady pairing, kind of leaving Ruben Diaz a bit on the outside. So Pepe and Danilo are definite candidates. Ruben Diaz is a likely candidate. And we have 4 possible candidates: Domingos Duarte, Jose Fonte, Thiago Giallo, and David Carmo. I would imagine maybe one of them. Usually they bring about 5 central defenders to the cup. But it seems like Ruben Diaz is going to be kind of a substitute unless someone gets injured, and maybe 2 of the possible candidates there. But again, Danilo Pereira is actually coded as a midfielder. Left back, we have Nuno Mendes as a definite and Rafael Guerreiro as a likely, and I kind of think they're going to be rotating. Guerreiro has kind of been in the position primarily, but Nuno Mendes has made inroads, and there's not enough evidence to suggest which one would be a starter. Not so on the right side, though. Right back, João Cancelo was out with coronavirus for Euro 2020, but is back now and seems to have a firm hold on the right back position. The likely candidate is Diogo Dalot, and kind of the outgoing candidate is Nelson Semedo. So we think it's possible he makes the squad, but maybe not. But João Cancelo with Diogo Dalot kind of in a backup role there on the bench. In the midfield, they generally went with a 4-3-3 formation, but they did use a couple of other formations and won't necessarily stick to that. But generally, it is one central defender. It's very hard to tell, though, because it could be any one of a number of players. So perhaps better if we do all of these players together. So defensive midfielders, we have Ruben Neves and João Palhinha as likely to make it on the squad. Central midfielders, we have William Carvalho and Matheus Nunes as likely candidates, with Renato Sanchez and Vitinha as possible candidates. I can't really see, I wouldn't be surprised if one of them started, but I don't see anyone jumping out at me as a starter. So it could be any one of them, or maybe a bit of a combination, or maybe none at all, because another confusing thing about the midfielders, they move around quite a bit. So we created a category of versatile midfielders for those who move around a lot. And for definite candidate, we have Bruno Fernandes and Bernardo Silva. And as a likely candidate, João Moutinho. I think actually Bruno Fernandes and Bernardo Silva will start without necessarily predicting where they'll start. It could be anywhere. And I think João Moutinho has a good chance of starting also. But I'm going to put him as a yellow in that he will start some games, not necessarily all of them. But I'm not even willing to put yellow on any of the defensive or central midfielders, because I just can't tell which it'll be. So let's move on. Left midfielders and right midfielders will probably be a selection of these defensive, central, and versatile midfielders that we've talked about. On the left wing, I think Diogo Jota and Rafael Leao will share starts. So I don't see anyone as a single starter. And on the right wing, but Diogo Jota and Rafael Leao really sharing starts as left attacking midfielders, left wingers, or left forwards, depending on the formation they use. But I think they will rotate basically in that upper left quadrant of the field. The next candidates I see as possible starters are in the attacking midfielder role. And again, I think if we go back to the versatile midfielders, Bruno Fernandes and Bernardo Silva, I think they're more likely to play central attacking midfielder. And I don't see any of the candidates we have listed here as, starters. However, on the right attacking midfield side, I think it's going to be like the left, with likely candidates Goncalo Guedes and Otavio sharing the starting role. So I can't pick out a definite starter there. Maybe Otavio has the edge, having started all the Nations League games in June. João Felix, a possible secondary striker, would be more of a substitute. And forwards, we only have two definite candidates, Cristiano Ronaldo and Andre Silva. Andre Silva has been coming more and more into it, not necessarily playing as a centre forward, but perhaps part of a two-forward line with Cristiano Ronaldo, or we've seen both of them kind of playing as the left attacking midfielder. So I'm going to say for Cristiano Ronaldo, put him in as a definite starter. And Andre Silva, I'm tempted to do the same, but just to be cautious, I'll put him as a sometime starter. Okay, well, I'm sure there will be a few surprises when the starting lineups come out, so I don't do that with any supreme confidence, but that is kind of a glance, and we'll update that in the podcast, in the update podcast. So that brings us to the end of this podcast, and I'll just make the picture a bit smaller for our YouTube viewers, and keep in mind we will be doing that update podcast and including new information that comes out, the September games, any friendlies we play, and the preliminary and final rosters. So we'll probably do the podcast after the final rosters are released. Meanwhile, keep an eye on us at Soccerphiles Canada. That's Soccerphiles with a PH in the middle and an S at the end, and our website, soccerphiles.captivate.fm. And check the show notes, which I've been working on, with lots of notes and links to help guide you through the series that we've done. Thanks for listening, and hope to see you again in our next mediacast. Bye-bye.